Today's Island Tales, we've asked Joe Dunleavy to come along and lead us on that. I first met Joe when I got a request, an invitation to help him with his research, which is shortly after I was invited to do something similar for the IRDG piece in Q2. And I actually think there was some coordination there.
Yeah.
So I was very curious about the research, and then I was very curious about the person. And then I was talking to Joe, and then he said, well, would I be willing to do an interview? I said, of course. You want to give me a soapbox? Of course I'll talk to you about the soapbox. I have to say, though, I can't see very much of me in the final report that Joe's done. So I don't know what was going on there, but he'll explain that shortly himself. So if we introduce Joe himself, he's a Sligo man who's in Donegal,
Yep.
who spent some time in the States.
Yep.
He's got his background in computer science, bachelor's degree, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was,
And
yeah.
then on to UX and innovation and leadership. So he's done the academic route through masters. MBS, I think, was the actual degree.
MBS, yeah, a few years, about 10, 11 years ago, I did one in LYIT. That's now ATU.
Yeah. And he couldn't get enough of that learning nonsense, so he's back doing another one. I just don't understand. And then that led him to this point that he made to Charlie just before everybody else joined, which was what he didn't really find much in terms of research in Ireland. So he said, well, he'll sort that out. He'll fill that gap. So I had a really couple of fascinating conversations with Joe, and I thought to myself early on, this would be good. Joe would be good for our network, and this is good for us as a topic and an anchor. And I think we've got some learnings in there. So if we have a little think, what are we doing here today? We're asking Joe to tell us his story, and then we're asking him to tell about the research, and then no better group than this to take a good poke. Yeah, some respect, not too much respect, but a good poke at the learnings and the research itself. And what does that tell us about us as innovators, the organizations that we work with, and of course, using Joe's phrase, Ireland Inc., the island that we work and live in. Mr. Dunleavy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Owen. Very much appreciated, and a pleasure to join you all today. I will spend probably 15 to 20 minutes. I'm not looking to do much past that. I was on the fence about bringing slides or not. I for one, like, watch way too many slides on presentations like this, so I thought it'd be much more useful just to kind of provide an overlay. I will at one point share the thought leadership piece. That's the summary of the research. Now that's the summary that's going out to the public. So there's elements of it that I can speak into a little bit more detail here, but more than happy to share that document with you after the fact as well. So what I will touch on in that document is the executive summary, the infographic of the overall findings, and then maybe some of the recommendations, next steps. So that's kind of the approach that we'll take as well. So first things first, thanks very much for the intro. I won't cover the same stuff again. I suppose from what I do today in my day job perspective, and to provide a little bit of context there, I'm a software engineer by trade. I started in Microsoft about 20 years or so ago, and then eventually kind of fell into more the strategy side and the innovation side of delivery. Prior to my current role, heading up innovation at a company called Endava, which I'll spend a minute or two speaking about, I worked in financial services for 16 years. So for those of you that may have followed along the Irish success story of Primerica Systems Ireland up in Letterkenny, I joined Primerica in 2005 as a software engineer, as a young lad, and thought I'd stay maybe a couple of years doing insurance technology work, and 16 years later, I ended up jumping into various different roles. Part of that was in the US, as Owen mentioned. So specific to the innovation topic that we're talking about, I helped out in various different innovation capacities in Prudential as a financial services company, and a very 140-year-old insurance company. They had a couple of different approaches towards innovation, which I got involved in. That kind of piqued my interest. And then what I learned along the way in the US, I then brought home and actually helped in 2015, when Primerica in Letterkenny had grown to, at that point, about 1,400 people. We changed campus. So we ended up creating a physical innovation lab, which, again, not really touch upon that too much today, but happy to talk about that in the conversation after. So built a physical innovation lab and created an innovation capability to help drive an innovation approach within Primerica, with the what was then close to 1,700 people by the time over the years I was there, as well as drive an innovation agenda for our parent company, which is Prudential Financial in the US, which is a a rather large financial services company over there. So that's kind of how I fell into innovation. And then in more recent times, my role is actually heading up an innovation, the innovation capability or practice, if you will, at Endava. Endava, for all of you who are probably wondering, because most people in Ireland would not have a strong awareness of Endava. We're probably one of the larger companies that around that people may not have heard of before. We're 12,000 person digital technology transformation firm out of London. We're headquartered out of London. We operate globally. We do have an Irish office, albeit we have about a small team of about 10, 12 people in Ireland supporting Ireland. But the way we work, it's very much a close to client delivery approach. So we provide services and anything technology and strategy in the west of Europe is serviced out of our Eastern and Central European delivery centres. But we work very closely globally with clients around their innovation practices. So that's a little bit about me and my career path up until now. So probably things about innovation that are important to me are I probably take an innovation-led, a technology approach towards innovation, but more importantly, a product or user-centered approach towards innovation, because I think innovation is one of those things that's hard to know what it means, and it means different things to different people. To the research, I actually never defined what innovation was as part of the research as well. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind, which I'll touch upon in a second. That's a little bit of background about me, my own path up till now. Obviously, this is not a commercial for Endava, so I'm not going to talk much more about that, but I'll certainly touch upon it as part of the research. And again, lovely to talk to you today. So the research and how it came about, the actual course itself, there's a story there as well, which goes to innovation. When we were at Primerica, it was one of the biggest success stories I think we had was working very closely with LYIT. And when you think about how you innovate as an approach towards being successful in a region like Donegal, because the ambition for Prue was to get to 300 people. We got to 1,630 or so by the time that I came out. So like, how do you build a company of that scale, that size in a town of about 25,000 people? You had to innovate. In order to innovate, one of the things that we recognized very early on was we could only be as successful as our partnerships and the groups that we took on from an open innovation approach. And a very, very important one was LYIT. So much so that, and comes to the course and the crux of the research, about 5 years ago now, I sat down with one of the creative design leads, lecturers in LYIT, now ATU, a guy called Porrick Lynch, and we actually said, design thinking as a philosophy seems to be something that's more and more important to companies, but there's very little actual maybe academic HDips or bolt-ons that if you've done a commerce degree or a computer degree, but you want to kind of get your toe into design thinking as a concept, user experience, the approaches of user interface design, Miro boards for collaboration, the likes, there wasn't a lot there. It was more, you could do online courses, of course, but regionally. So we ended up sitting down and co-created, us from our Primerica view of trying to serve a very large financial services company, as well as LYIT, what would a course look like? And we actually created together a HDIP, a 1-year HDIP in user experience and applied innovation. So there was elements of innovation in there, but there was also a user experience. That course got blessed. It then became a thing. And we had, I believe it was 6 or 7 people from Primerica be part of the first cohort. And then lockdown hit. And I ended up working from home like everybody else, thinking it'd be a 2-month thing. And it turned into what's now actually a 2.5-year thing, because I've continued working from home, even in this role that I do currently, which is remote. So opportunity came and I says, listen, I really like that course that we actually had some input into. Wouldn't it be actually a nice opportunity to go and do it? So what is now just 2 and a bit or so years ago, I ended up doing the HDIP in LYIT completely online. So we went in that first day. We got into the campus the first day, and then the whole world kind of changed, and we did the entire course end to end online. So the HDIP was a September to the following May thing. Completed that course, and then again from examples of innovation, they were able then to extend it into a Master's of Arts actually, and bolt on to it an extra 30 credits to make it into an MA. So in that period of time, I moved from Primerica into Endava and had the opportunity this past summer then to basically do a 16-week academic focus project. Very much has to match the themes, obviously, of the course, but it was relatively open in terms of what we could focus in on. And that's kind of where it brings us up to the kind of current day. I wrapped that course literally in the last 3 or so weeks. The thought leadership piece, which I'll talk through in a minute as well, is the outcome of some of that. But just before I kind of get there, let me provide a little bit of context. I've been in innovation now for Mother Prue, as we would have called it, or now Endava, for like kind of close on 6 years at this point. And I think one of the things I always find that people and our clients kind of struggle with is we want to innovate. And then you go, well, what does that mean? I mean, because again, for some innovation, and this came out as the findings of the research, for some innovation was going and doing research in the market to find that a Miro solution was a thing that allowed people to work asynchronously but still achieve what they wanted to do during lockdown, during COVID, while all working from home. A game changer for that company out of the research. But would it, like, if you compare that to what Elon Musk is trying to achieve with Mars, and I'm not getting into I know there's a lot of fanboys or people that are pro and anti. I'm not interested in that part of Elon, but what he's trying to do with Mars, right? That's true Horizon 3 innovation, or maybe you kind of can't really ask people what they want to achieve for the Mars ambition, right? It's very new. So if innovation's your range of research on a Miro board and putting people on Mars, and people then come to companies like Endava to innovate, I always kind of feel that the understanding the why and understanding the who is usually something that we typically turn back on and ask them. So for what it's worth, and this is what the research is centered in, is I always have found that taking a more product or design thinking / user led approach towards innovation has typically had more impact and been able to drive a better outcome than just like innovate. Because when you turn up to companies to innovate, they have like a whole pile of innovation tools in the toolbox, a hackathon, a Shark Tank Dragon's Den style pitch thing, C-suite backing ideas, idea gathering in house, etc., 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 rather than it being, why are we trying to do this? What are we trying to drive? More often than not, again, if you take the McKinsey's 3 horizon model, or Horizon 1, 2, and 3, if three's the putting people to Mars, I would say very few companies in Ireland operate at the Horizon 3, because the nature of the beast being that it takes a bunch of money, a bunch of people, and a huge amount of effort. So for a lot of clients in Ireland, it's typically Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and there's no judgment here. Just to innovate, just to improve, as long as you've got a good outcome to strive and a good end game, business value, cost savings, whatever the case may be. I'm an equal opportunity guy when it comes to innovation. But that being said, when somebody engages us, I really like to go back with, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal, or BHAGs for those that you're trying to drive? Off that, then let's understand what are some of your strategic pillars you're trying to do to drive that. And then if we understand that, we can then understand, so what product levers or what users are we trying to influence? Who are we trying to delight? How are we trying to delight them, and why? So my innovation approach has been adjusted over the years to be much more user-center led, and some might call it a product mindset. But if you don't kind of know the product or the outcome you're trying to drive for those people you're trying to drive it for, it could, in my opinion, I think it can be quite hard to move that needle from an innovation perspective. Or at least you might get a few wins, but for it to actually stick and become, I think the success of innovation has to be repeatable and something that delivers value on a rolling basis, rather than it being, we hit gold once and we've struggled for years. Because nobody would argue that it's very easy to bring up an innovation function, relatively easy, with some money, and wind it down the first time that there's a cost cutting exercise, because it just hasn't, what is it it's actually delivered, and it's very hard to kind of measure. So to me, if you take that product led approach towards innovation, or do a user centered approach towards innovation, it typically bears more fruit than it doesn't. And because the MA was in applied innovation and user experience design, I wanted to try that same theory out with the research. And that brings us right up to what the actual research focus was. And the research focus was this. There's very little actual academic research available in Ireland today around what does, and I'm not talking about for companies that already have an innovation practice or an innovation approach. I was interested in tapping into them to understand, what does good look like in your eyes? What are some of the valuable lessons learned that are worth sharing with others? Do you use a framework for innovation? If you do, would you be comfortable enough sharing? And for those that do use a user-centered, like typically maybe the Double Diamond from the UK Design Council or whatever, if you're using design thinking or a user-centered approach towards your innovation delivery, from your viewpoint, do you think it helps, hinders, or really you're on the fence about it? And the approach was research-based. I ended up doing 17 expert interviews. One of them was Owen, and a shout out to him for that. It was anonymously done because what I wanted to have was like a warts and all. So what you're not going to see in the thought leadership piece is who I spoke to, because that was the promise to them, and I think it also is valuable for the research. And there was 33 anonymous surveys, and again, the surveys were targeted at people in innovation practice doing their thing, and I would have actually tapped into that community through IRDG, who I would have been a member of in the past, and they were gracious enough to guide me in getting it to the right people. And in addition to that, was leveraging my LinkedIn network as well, which I also leveraged for the expert interviews. So that was in essence it, right? The questions went out anonymously on the online questionnaire. I added some questions for the expert interviews. It was done over a 6-week period, and then I had to drag out of that 6-week kind of fact gathering, was then actually put some findings and things together. And ultimately, it's for Ireland Inc. I think the value of this is only really in sharing this thing, hence why I'm here today. And what you're going to see is the thought leadership piece that I'm sharing, that I'm going to share and cover some of the highlights, is one that I am actually turning out over to on a public setting through my own social media channels, and I'm actually going to put it out through Endava as well. We do quite a bit of thought leadership pieces with Endava, and again, we don't do them for here. We're trying to sell you services. It's genuine thought leadership pieces about why is payment so important to the insurance industry? Where do we see it going? And we cite as many non-client references as to what we see in the marketplace. So for that reason, we're going to put this thought leadership piece out through that ecosystem as well. So I'll pause for a second. That's kind of setting the scene. Background about me, my journey. I'm not in innovation forever, but I've 20 years experience. Of the last 6 or 7 is typically in the innovation practice. The MA and how it came about and how we even innovated it and approach, because we bridged the gap that we believed was there and that needed filling. It was really nice to see the course come to material. And then I didn't really think at the time of designing it or co-designing it with LYIT that it would actually be something I'd end up doing. Because I had the scars from the last Masters, but lo and behold, COVID kicked in. I had time on my hands because I'm big into sport and coaching and stuff, and all that stopped. So it was a perfect excuse. So I jumped into it, bolted on the MA in the last couple of weeks, and I'm happy to bring up and share on the screen the content, because I'm conscious of like spending maybe 2 or 3 minutes on it and then opening up for a conversation. So let me just share my screen here and cover. So this is the thought leadership piece. And again, we'll make the document. Everything in here is going out on a public forum the next couple of weeks anyway, so we'll make it available. It's broken out, as you would imagine, into it had to be around 3,500 words. So I'm slightly over that, but you'll give me that. Introduction, exec summary, I've kind of covered already. There's the bit about the approaches. I covered the finding. I covered the approach. This was the 17 expert interviews, 33. I would have liked to have gone larger. The reality was it was probably time boxed by the fact that the course was time boxed. So would there be more opportunity to do more research on it? Quite possibly, but I was up against it I did have to meet the deadline and get it in. So some of the findings, I think probably more useful than anything is the findings. This is an infographic summary of the same, and this is probably worth a minute or two spending. We've shared the document, but there is the detail around the responses, which I covered. This was the percentage of time spent on innovation by interviewees and respondents. So of the ranges, so you can see there, 47% are spending 50% or more of the time. So we definitely got into the people that we were kind of targeting, or people that are spending quite a bit of time in their day job focusing on innovation. Whether they had a dedicated team or not, the company size, we had really good diversity in terms of the sizes of the companies. 40% small, 18% medium, 42% at large companies. And again, the criteria is in here as to what broke them out. But kind of fast tracking a little bit, because this is the kind of crux of what I was trying to prove out. Do you use a framework? Only 52% use a model, which was interesting. 48% do not. Of that 48%, some use a partial model or a piece of it. Of the 52%, nobody's using one model. to the letter of the law. Everybody's using pieces of models, but nobody has one model. Well, not nobody. Two companies did use a model, and they did use it quite religiously and found that to be of value. And then here's the other piece, right? This one is really, really interesting. Over 60% of those that do use a model are using design thinking. And you'll be glad to hear, and I'll fast forward a little bit, you'll be glad to hear those that do use design thinking very strongly in favor of the fact that it helps them with their thing. Other bits here, we're going to run out of time. I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole. A couple of word clouds of the responses we got, again, with more detail in here that we can read through later. Couple of comments that are verbatim, but again, I don't reference who they come from. But here is essentially, just to close out, a couple of the thing. Number one by a country mile in terms of your experience of success comes from the value of having senior leadership and executive buy-in from the very top. It's a critical thing from the start, not only to have there, but maybe even to set aside some things, because if you don't have the executive sponsorship, it runs its course and it typically runs out of runway, and it also runs out of ambition. You also need your leadership to help guide the teams that you focus in on from an innovation perspective. So that was number one. Another one was around the use of frameworks. So if you are looking at using innovation or driving innovation, again, based on this insights, there's very good value and experience in considering some sort of a user-centered innovation framework. I suggest the Double Diamond. It's one that came up a couple of times, but again, that I would never recommend one model to rule them all, but it's just a suggestion. So, but the value of this research did show that if doing innovation, if driving innovation, you should definitely consider a framework. And then this is the third thing, and it's a very easy one to state, but it's surprising just how many people got caught up in analysis paralysis around how to innovate. But just get started, do something. The old a journey is it starts with a single step. A marathon starts with a building up to a walk, then a 5K, and so on. Same thing here, right? So why is it important to get started, and a little bit of information on that. And again, conclusion and clues out is here. The references are there. This is the references for the thought leadership piece, not the overall research. There was 60 plus references for that, but I tried to keep the thought leadership piece down to something that's consumable by everyone. And then in the appendix, you'll see the more summary of the infographics, as well as the actual questions that were posed to people as well, so that you have them. So you'll see a level of consistency between the research, anonymous research done through questionnaires, and the expert interviews. I did ask a couple of extra questions of the expert interviews because of who I was. These were people typically in senior positions or in C-suite positions who are actually driving multiple people or teams of people doing innovation. So it was too good of an opportunity not to also get in some insight there around how are they aligned organizationally, how do they manage budget, not specifically how much budget do they have, but where does the budget come from, that type of thing. That's me bang on around the 24-25 minute mark, so I don't want to overdo it and open it up. Love to get the thoughts, love to get the conversation going, and certainly my views, guys, not saying it right or wrong. I'm not representing Endava. This is more my view, and would love to get the thinking of the audience, and hope this is helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Joe. The floor is open. Who wants to dive in?
David, straight in there.
David, straight in. Very good. Come on, David.
Yes. Sorry, I apologies. I only landed in for the past 5 minutes, right? So I'm going to rewatch the recording on this. So really sorry, but Joseph, it looks really interesting. So I'm definitely going to rewatch that. Yeah, just interested. You had a pie chart in your infographic there that showed innovation models and you design thinking. There was something there that says entire. What was that? What did that mean?
1 second now. Let me bring it up for you. I'll share the screen again. This spot you're talking about the bottom here, David, yeah?
Yeah.
No problem. This is Enterprise Ireland's model, where they've actually, if you go through the LEO, the local enterprise office, Enterprise Ireland has its own. Now, it could be a while ago, right? It hasn't been around for, I haven't heard it referenced in a while, but it's an Enterprise Ireland model that they had around how startups can leverage how they go about doing innovation using a framework. So that's an Enterprise Ireland framework. Again, like if you're interested and you ping me, happy to kind of get the actual link directly, because it's not in the reference for this thought leadership piece, but it will be in the reference for the broader piece. So that's an Enterprise Ireland model that I don't know where if they developed it themselves or co-developed it.
David, do you want to do a bit of full disclosure on that point?
Absolutely not. I want to hang up. And so, Joe, for full disclosure, which is why these smiling, laughing heads I'm looking at.
You work for Enterprise Ireland, is
I
my
work for
guess?
Enterprise Ireland as an innovation specialist.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. I'd like to understand a little bit more what that's referring to, and if that's possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
A sidebar conversation.
Absolutely, David. Happy to. So I'm obviously going on. I gather I didn't obviously fact check what I got. I just had to more get the audience and get the insight. But I can actually get the details for you. I won't be able to share who they came from, but I can absolutely give you the details.
Yeah, that's great. No, that would be very helpful. Thanks very much, Joseph.
No bother, David.
Good stuff. I know John's got his hand up here, but Paul had a question in the chat first. So were the models mutually exclusive, e.g. design thinking versus service design, or?
No, the question was, and it's framed, it's in the appendix. The question was, do you use a framework? Yes or no? And then a list of the frameworks. If you do use a framework, are any of them user-centered or design thinking focused? Again, I kept it quite open because I didn't want to say, do you use the double diamond for this very reason, right? So I actually approached it was, does your framework use user-centered approaches? And if they said yes, then I drilled in a little bit, especially on the expert interviews, because that means various different things to people. The very, very honest answer is the lion's share of people that are using user-centered approaches or design thinking approaches. The ones that more often than not commonly come up were the use of personas and the use of customer journeys. They were predominantly the ones that, and I know design thinking is way more than that, but they're the two that commonly came up. And then, and by the way, I got pros and cons on personas, like people getting too wedded to their personas, people not having their personas done at an accurate enough level. I heard it all, but the majority was. So I didn't say it wasn't mutually exclusive. I let them list all of their models, and then the summary was done based on everything I got from them by obviously plugging it into an Excel document and getting those percentages associated.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question to that, but let John go first as he had his hand up there.
Thanks. Joe, I may know the answer to this already, but I'm going to ask. I know you actually have the list of recommendations there. Is the assumption is that by not doing those are the biggest obstacles, or was there any obstacle that's not on that list under recommendations that needs to be?
It's a great question, John. I suppose it's probably a bit of both, and let me share what I mean. I had to provide my thoughts on the summary for making it consumable. Like the document that I haven't shared with you, which was the actual submission, was like much closer to like 7,000-8,000 words, right? So what I did was I picked out maybe those themes. The number one by a country mile was the executive sponsorship, clearly. The second one around the framework, it was 1 and 2 are pretty much there. The third one I kind of then took a little bit of editorial privilege to kind of decide what it was. There was more findings there, but and this is where I'd say here's the but. This is why I said it was yes and no. It's not a huge amount of people that, you know, we need to keep that in mind, right? Because the surveys were anonymous, I have an ID that told me that I could always look them back up if I needed to from a GDPR perspective. But what I didn't have is I don't ask them for their name and their details, right? So the sample size, and this is like everything with research, 50 in total, 17 experts, 33. So I would say in the time I had and the sample size, I'd be cautious, and that's why I do call out and be very upfront about the sample size at the start of it. So the first and 1 and 2 were as they appeared. The third one was more editorial privilege based on some themes I saw. Whether it was the third most referenced one or not, I would need to go back and validate.
Yeah, I also think, as you were saying, take the first step is critical. Yeah, action is important. All yours, Charlie.
Great, thank you. Frank, we'll come on to you in a second, but about the frameworks themselves, I mean, the frameworks that you've mentioned and also the ones that Eric has just put into the chat as well, they're all ideation frameworks. So they're all about the process, the ideation process from we have a problem to solve to commercialization potentially. So the double diamond, design thinking, those things. What about frameworks or structures outside of that? You talked a lot initially about the need for strategy, the need for strategic alignment, and I 100% buy into that. And I would be sort of advocating the same approach. What about frameworks that cover all of that stuff as well? Have you looked at those, or do you use any of them?
Yeah, I did. So the submission, Charlie, of the actual academic piece to get the blessing for the research, I did a bunch, and I would be happy to share that again. I probably need to check for sensitivity. I actually did not a full, but a fairly thorough literature review of frameworks across broad innovation, not just the idea-led one. So you had Gartner in there, where they squeezed together design thinking plus lean startup plus agile and call it innovation framework. You had the three horizon model from McKinsey, so on, so on, so on. I even came across a couple of ones that there's one out there that, how can you start with an idea gathering when you're not even sure what it is you're trying to solve in the first place, type of frameworks. So for that piece, the literature review, I ended up going as broad as I could, but specific to the academic research and the summary I'm providing. I didn't define any frameworks. I didn't actually suggest any frameworks, just like I didn't define innovation for these people either. So we have to preface it a little bit by saying the frameworks that came up, the majority of them, based on the sample size, were we have a challenge, and we try to we gather ideas, and then we try to solve off those ideas. Bar two companies, if I remember correctly, that ended up actually having their own frameworks that they developed in-house, and they weren't idea led. So the framework, I didn't say pick from this framework list which one you use. You'll see in the questions in the appendix, it was left open.
Okay, because I'm thinking kind of frameworks like the ISO standards, the EFQM, those those are outside scope in effect.
And
for this.
Paul O'Neill's comment on chat is the same direction. Systems thinking.
Yeah.
Eric, thank you very much for sharing that from your work. That was priceless, brilliant. And Joe would love to see that as well. I'm sure he will shortly.
Frank.
Yeah, I'm looking at a company, Malaysia Airlines, and it reminded me of when I was a kid in school, my first work, and quality was offline. So there were quality circles, which made quality kind of orphaned within the organization. And when I'm working with SMEs and even scaling companies, I see a lot of the same kind of mindset. Oh, we have Johnny's really good at innovation. We have him doing that. And the thing gets orphaned. Malaysia Airlines kind of wanted to make it inline. So they gave people 3 months experience of innovation frameworks and thinking. And then the idea was they brought it back into the organization. And so they're, it's almost like the anti-Pareto. Everybody, 80% of their time is spent managing today and yesterday, but 20% is available to make things better and to be reflective rather than reactive. And I just wonder, what do you think about that as a mindset?
Yeah, so absolutely have views on it. Wouldn't be tied into the research, but like, let me give you my 2 cents on it. When we were at Pru, we did innovation as a group of people, almost like the white coat people behind glass, sexy innovation labs in white coats, building widgets to then fire them out on the floor and wondering why it didn't stick. Like, well, we're in here doing we're making these great golf clubs. We put them out to all the golfers outside, and they're kind of like going, A, I don't know who you are. B, why are you giving this to me? And I'll be honest with you, I think it struggles to actually scale. I also think it struggles to make a real impact. When I came to Ireland, to Primerica, what we actually did was, and this is by design, by the way, we ended up creating an innovation capability. But what we did was, as part of our operating model, it was only going to be successful by being tied into everybody else. And how did we do that? We did that I had a team of myself and 3 others. So by the nature of the beast, we had no choice but to be embedded into the rest of the organization. So one of the things we did with our operating model was we actually created working groups. So like practice groups, if you want, where we used to, so our approach at Primerica and our lab was, we took the teams that were important. This is more technology, but we took the teams that were important to the company through our architecture knowledge of their strategy and where they were going next. And then what we did was we advertised out to all of the company, hey, This technology is something that's of interest to our parent company. It's on their roadmap. We're open to everybody in the company, all 1,500 people who would like to get involved in a working group over a 12-week period of time, whereby what we do is we make the Innovation Lab available to you. We give you lab hours. We'll give you the machinery you may not have available through a corporate network. So maybe laptops off the network. Maybe if you needed VR headsets, if that's what you were looking at, we'd provide that. And then we would do all of the research around the SDKs or anything that was out there. The lab team used to build up we'd provide the foundation, and then everyone from the working groups would join. And what used to happen was we used to get oversubscribed for those working groups. They'd be 12 weeks time boxed. We always had a little bit at the end where people applied what they learned, and they became our proof of concepts that then actually allowed us to pitch them into Mother Prue for them to actually become billable projects. And this approach, we did it with artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual reality, blockchain. There were themes of things. Now I'm going back here 4 years ago when we established this, Frank. But to be quite honest with you, the 20% became what people invested in getting involved in a working group was they got the chance to, because techies like learning good tech and working with other techies, because maybe what they're working on daily for the client or the customer is not the most exciting thing they're ever going to do. So we gave them that concept of a 20%. We weren't able to carve out the 20% because we were ultimately a chargeback model to the US in the case of America. But people were able to invest extra time and energy. We gave them the ability to learn, apply their passion. And then what we did was after those working groups, we did things like investing them in further learning and that type of thing. So it worked. I wouldn't say it's the best model in the world, but it certainly was one, because what happened was our innovation lab was a team of 3 people, but it became only popular and only a success through engaging everybody else in the company. We had other approaches, but I gave you the operating model around the working groups because it worked quite well for us. So my opinion on it is, if you do a lab with white coats and people producing widgets and nobody's integrated into that, it's never going to sustain you. You might hit a couple of wins, but if you truly want it to be part of an organization, you need to have innovation as part of the way everybody does their job, but give them the ability to be successful in that too. So you need to support them. That's my view.
Perfect.
That's good.
Brilliant.
Owen,
Is it my turn now?
I think so.
But
I have a feeling this is going to be a tough question because you had the expert interview here as well. So let me get prepped for it.
10 questions. Who
Come
wants
on.
to stay here for another hour? No. Keeping it simple, just to highlight that in the chat, there's a piece of data, an image from Charlie in terms of when we did our piece of research on this.
Yeah.
And another from Eric, which is fantastic. Eric, thank you very much for sharing that. You can see these different perspectives, and you can hear where Charlie's coming from. Charlie and I would be similar in that, we're systems guys. It's easy to put me in a box. I'm a systems guy. Okay. So from systems perspective, it's not that we would treat everything that you say is wrong. And in fact, a lot of what you think of and say in design terms is a slightly different phrasing. And the systems people are saying the same thing, although they sometimes end up in a room arguing against each other, which is waste of resources. It's both. But I'd love to see a systems lens on this. Maybe not. It's not really in the thought piece, and it probably isn't in the larger document for the MA, but I'd love to see that systems design thinking discussion develop here among us. That'd be valuable another day, perhaps. My question, simple version, any real surprises?
Any real surprises? I suppose a couple, right? I mean, I suppose the lack of use of a framework, albeit a small sample size, right? 52% using one, 48% not. I'll be honest, this is not a judgment call because I know this is going out on a YouTube video to watch back, but I would be a little bit weary if I was doing innovation and whatever that means to you and your company if you didn't have a framework driving it. I'll just be honest with you. I don't think that's hardly shocking for the people who I'm talking to, but I would say if you don't have a framework, I'd encourage you to consider one. So that was probably a little bit surprising. The scale of innovation in Ireland and the I suppose the maturity of different companies and the journey that they're on, it's massive. Like I gave examples there of some of the discoveries, and then I can't give the example on the other end of the extreme because I'll give away who it is, but like we're talking that innovation spectrum in Ireland, even from the number of people supporting it, Like one organization I spoke to had over 220 people employed in research in Ireland. Now, again, hardly shocking. Very large company, very successful company. But like when you compare that to, like I talked to some startups because I wanted it to be as true a reflection as it could be in terms of companies of all sizes. And for the startup ecosystem, I mean, again, how far removed are we from, and Davos probably somewhere in the middle at 11,000, 12,000 people, but you know, that spectrum. So not so much, the surprising one was definitely the framework, but I would say probably the range. Like in Ireland, innovation in Ireland has such a broad spectrum. It means different things to different people. And again, I didn't define it on purpose. And that was probably a little bit surprising. No, that's probably about it, yeah.
So if I get to follow up my own question, please. I hoped you might go that direction, your answer. So thank you. And if you take that answer, I don't have a framework. Did you have an opportunity to follow that up? Do you have any sense of what that means? Did the interviews help you to get any sense of what it means?
The interviews did, yeah. Obviously, it was a bit different than the anonymous surveys. The interviews did, yeah. I mean, in essence, it was in 3 occasions. It was they had their own framework. So their interpretation of it was, I don't have. Do I use a framework? I do, but they didn't feel the answer was yes because it was their own framework. It was something that they created themselves. So it's like it's not a academic or a model that's already available freely on the web, right? So that was one aspect of it. The others were we use multiple, and we use pieces of multiple, so we don't have one framework. So they interpreted the question of, no, I don't use a framework. I use user stories from Agile, and I use the customer journeys from design thinking. And together we have depending on the particular use case, the particular thing we're trying to drive, we use different parts of different frameworks. The one thing that did stand out, and I referenced it already, no one company is using any one framework to the letter of the law, except for those companies that may have had their own version of, which is a kind of a hybrid of a couple of different things. So nobody's like using design thinking pure, or nobody's using the double diamond pure. They're using the parts that work for them based on their experience.
That's really interesting because people ask for design thinking. And my background is very similar to yours, Joe. I mean, my background is software and ran software teams and so on. And we always used to get, we need agile. And we go, okay, do you realize that means this, and this? What you actually need is this bit of agile and this bit of waterfall even, and this bit of something else. And you bring it together for something that works for you. And I think innovation is certainly only reaching now the maturity where people are able to do that and go, there's a good bit, I'll use that, and I'll tie it in with this good bit that does this as well.
I would completely agree, Charlie. I actually have this, it's not really innovation related, but I have this concept or a theory in my head. And I'm thinking if I ever managed to write a book, if that was the thing that even interests me, which is kind of not on the radar right now, I actually believe fundamentally, not just in innovation, but just in life, I actually think the middle is very hard to beat. I think anything at the extremes is actually not a positive, because I'm into fitness in quite a bit of a way. So I train 6 days a week. Some people might say that's extreme, but I train like for maybe 20-25 minutes or an hour on some other days, like a Tuesday and Thursday. But I'm not the guy who's like, I don't touch wood, and I'm going to jinx myself. I don't have any soft tissue injuries. I never have done. I've always trained, but I've always trained that's sustainable. So I have a friend who's a fitness guy who says, don't do all your training in life in 3 or 5 years and be that person that pops the hamstring trying to run their 18th marathon. Do it over the course of your entire life. I also think if you think about politics, economic procedures, models, I actually think anyone that's like really religious on the periphery, on the edges, if you're doing agile, you have to do every part of it. Versus I'm doing nothing because like we're a software engineering thing and it's a creative industry and we don't need a framework. For me, for what it's worth, whether it's innovation, delivery, or anything else, somewhere closer to the middle. Like don't eat any sugar. But then feel guilty when you have something like why are you doing all that training if you can't like have a day off and enjoy it? So for me, I think the philosophy of the middle is probably something I don't hear enough about, because people want you to pick. Are you this fan, or are you a Liverpool fan, or are you a United fan? I'm not suggesting that one because that's a bad example. Don't go in the middle on that one. But you know what I'm getting at. The middle ground is The middle ground
It's
is a good place, better place to be than people maybe think.
Yeah, it's not a bad place. That certainly isn't a bad place to be. We have another couple of hands up. I don't know, conscious we've got 9 minutes left. David, I think you had your hand up there first.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just to say, Joe, I have the same philosophy around eating takeaway food as you have as exercise. So I'm interested about in all of your interviews and the work that you did, and perhaps this was in your presentation. I didn't say it, so apologies if it was. How are companies kind of looking at success from innovation effort as distinct from overall success for the organization? So I have a lot of challenges with companies saying, yeah, well, you know, it's growth, it's revenue. Yeah, great, but what's the contribution of innovation? What does success look like? All this money you're putting into it.
Yeah.
How are they looking at success? What's driving them to keep a focus on it, to keep investing in it, based on the analysis you did?
Yeah, great question. There's a word cloud in there, David, that's in the article that actually talks about a little bit about what they deemed as success and given some examples. So I won't cover that, but it very much depended on the maturity of the company. For some of them, it was look, we're just happy during COVID to still be relevant and have engaged staff and workforce. So the success for innovation for us was just being able to still work with our staff, keep them in a good place. And that definition was there. For others, like in the ones that are investing millions, it was much more driven directly into the strategy of the company and what they were trying to drive. But both of them were saying it's innovation, and I certainly wasn't there to argue with them, because that was the one thing I didn't want to do, was because again it's maybe a little bit the middle ground. Back to what I was talking about, what innovation means to the company is probably up to them to define. And I'm not very stuffy about it. Like if because like think about it, there's examples there maybe in the manufacturing business. Like if you can shave a half a second off a manufacturing line and do it at scale, like to me and you, that'd be like, that's not really that innovative, is it? They took an extra step out. But like for that company, when you're doing it at scale, it can be like tens of thousands or millions of euro over a 20-25 years. So it varied, David, right? There's no one size fits all. And that's what I found interesting about it, because I didn't define innovation. I asked them anecdotally for their examples of innovation, and they shared with me. And for some, it was like, wow, I didn't even realize that you're even involved in doing that. We're talking like disruption to an industry, like taking the mortgages business and putting it on its head by introducing a product that, you know, remove risk on both sides and stuff like that. Again, I can't go too much into detail, but that was one example. You've also had people that built technology that was able to review a YouTube video, and it just based on the background of where the person was, with a fairly high levels of accuracy, tell you where in the world they were based on the footprint, what was behind them, the color of the landscape, yada yada yada. And then for others, it was just quite simply, I'm a startup. We survived COVID. Here's how we innovated. Leave me alone. So it was it was a large range.
Thank you. Okay, John, if it's a quick one.
It is a quick one.
Time for a very quick
in
question.
relation to that book that you're writing, Joe, I mean, that idea actually providing what's fit for purpose, what companies actually have found, what bits of stuff actually work from, that would be invaluable. If something like that information was available to share, it would be great. And again, it's suggestions. It's not, this is the way to do it. This is what has worked for others. That is the sort of information that's not readily available and will be invaluable. Yeah,
no, look, it's definitely something that I think will be of value to everybody. Because, you know, I very rarely come across, whether it's client work with Endava or this research or whatever else, I very rarely come across people that follow something to the letter of the law. And that's innovation frameworks, how you should train for anything, etc., etc. Because what happens is, it's written from an idealist perspective. If the world was perfect, and we don't live in a perfect world, so like you ultimately have to go on your own journey, find out what works for you, take the best of the frameworks. I definitely don't go by the seat of your pants and do nothing. Take the best of the frameworks, the parts that work for you, and if that's the parts that work for you and it makes you successful, whether that be innovation, running, whatever the case may be, I just think it's really, really valuable. And I would say, and I'll finish on this, I think from anyone who's providing consultancy to a company perspective, if you end up being the framework police, I always just find that you lose an awful lot of the audience that you may never get back. Because let's be honest, we don't, especially in something in a creative field or something in innovation, you don't really want to get told if you don't do it this way, it's like the old Agile manifesto. It's this over that. That people interpret that as it's this instead of that. That's not what it says. It's you prioritize this. It's a suggestion that you prioritize this over that. It doesn't mean the two of them can't live side by side. But like I've had Agile coaches come in and go, oh no, you can have documentation. Sure, the Agile manifesto says it's working software, and I may be off here, but I think it's working software over documentation. But like the amount of people that Agile purists will go, oh, well, we've no documentation. And like, how is that going to work in the real world? Because like people move on, new staff come in. Like it's not one in place of the other, but yet if people religiously get into like conversations about it's one over the other, it's not. It's not saying it's in place of. So again, I think that's the other thing that I would always say, and I'll finish on. It's dangerous to like, and just because I interpreted the Agile Manifesto one way, I can't go in and tell a company, John, I'm telling you now, this is how it is. It's open to interpretation. I think that's the thing I'll finish on. These frameworks are there as a guide. It's like a Sherpa. It's like there's it was actually came up in the research. I can't remember who said it, and again, I can't say anyway. But they basically said, if you're going to go to, if somebody came to you, so I asked about the framework, and he said, it's like this, Joe. He says if somebody's telling you you're going up to Everest in the morning, and you don't even have some sort of a guidebook or a framework, would you be, as he said, would you be shitting yourself?
That was me, by the way.
There you go.
I want my credit.
There you go.
I want my minute on the mountaintop.
But it's so true, right? Without that framework, without that approach, you would be worried, right? Versus like, I'll wing it. Like nobody's going to wing it up to Everest for your first trip. So, and I probably should have cited you in the thought leadership piece, but here's my way of citing you now. So that came from Owen, my only expert interview who you now know. So there you go.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Joe, that was fantastic. Really appreciate it. For me, the framework, yes or no, and what no framework means, that would be fascinating for me. I want more and more and more. I love the insight about the middle, the sane ground versus the zealots. And there's a whole lot of stuff about labs, about the story, about what the research can do next and what we can do with the research. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for the questions. A couple of pieces as we finish. Next week is a coffee stop. The 28th, we're doing something with the Public Service Innovation team. So with Deeper, which is we're running a reflection on Public Service Innovation Week, like our normal coffee stop, but we're inviting public servants to join us on that day. And then we're going to go have a look at a software platform with which we're doing with one of our members. And we've got something coming up in November called Not Just Jugad, about India and Ireland and how we might learn from each other. And as ever, we'd love to hear thoughts that you guys have for topics. And just to highlight again on the chat, there's a lot there. And Charlie has referenced a couple of the videos in relation to measurement, which we've done, which Eric remembers the alligators from. That was a good connection. So I think we've done a lot for an hour. Charlie, I don't know if you've got any last minute comments.
I think there's other stuff coming up soon as well. Owen and I keep promising that we're going to do something about innovation management systems, which actually is a framework that does more than the ideation piece. So we're just trying to give a plain English interpretation of what the hell's going on in the standards world around that space.
And we have to have Joe there for that day.
Yeah, definitely. And the other element that hopefully I can talk about a little bit more after next week, so I might touch it on the coffee shop next week, is about competency frameworks and skills for innovation. So taking it away from being a guru status to something where anybody and everybody can start to develop skills and innovation.
Charlie doesn't want to build himself up, so we'll do that. Charlie is presenting at the ISO conference next week in London on the subject of competency frameworks and how we might develop that in ISO, led by Ireland, hopefully led by Charlie. So that's a pretty cool thing to be doing, Charlie. On that note, I think have a great weekend, everybody. Well done again, Joe.
Thanks very much, everyone. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
Thanks,
Joe.
Have a good weekend.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.